So Microsoft just announced that they were acquiring GitHub.
I think in general it's very good for our entire space. The fact that there is big business to be made for devtools is good even if you don't want to go down that path. A lot of people are anti-Microsoft.
I think they realized that they basically lost a generation of developers. And also I think there's a new Microsoft. It's not the Microsoft of 20 years ago. So my summary is I think it's really good for the ecosystem. I think it unlocks a lot of money that could get reinvested into new startups. I think it's good for improving the power of developers.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
Hey, so Paul, Microsoft just announced that they were acquiring GitHub.
I did a good tweet storm about this yesterday.
Well, way to date the podcast.
I know, yeah. Well, you can figure it out.
Yesterday.
Also, they did it yesterday.
So the tweet storm is pretty good. So how did you come up with it?
I think this is the way I come up with all my tweets, is that I look at the comments on Hacker News and I sort of like close the thread angrily at how stupid all the comments are. And then whatever's still in my head 15 minutes later might get tweeted.
Well, all right. So anybody can go look up your tweets, but I'll just, do you want to summarize your thoughts around the acquisition?
I think in general it's very good for our entire space. Like a lot of people are anti-Microsoft and I'm not. I think Microsoft is on the right path and is financially incentivized to be good for open source. But also, great exit for devtools, which people said there was no money in. Great exit for a lot of people at GitHub. So there's going to be a huge crop of angel investors in the devtool space probably in the next couple of years. Just great for everyone.
I thought your tweet storm was great, but I'll summarize a couple things that jumped out for me. Just how much bigger it was than other devtool acquisitions.
Yeah, so
like
$7.5 billion.
Billion with a B.
Yeah, billion with a B. And a couple of years ago, I saw someone tweeting about, maybe Atlassian should buy GitHub. And it's like Atlassian couldn't buy GitHub, couldn't buy the value. I
have some gossip, which I will not attribute to anybody. Well, so for just some context, GitHub, $7.5 billion. The next closest acquisitions in the DevTool space had been Heroku for $500 million.
Heroku's $250.
$250 million.
Yeah.
And you're right. And Xamarin for $500,000.
Xamarin was around 500. So there's another one.
Trello?
Is Trello in the dev space?
They got acquired by Atlassian.
Oh, true.
I mean, I would put that in the dev space.
What was that API company that Google sort of reverse acquired? It went public and then Google acquired it. Apogee. Yeah. So that was $1 billion or 600 million or something like that.
Yeah,
it wasn't small.
They'd already gone public though, and then they got acquired, and MuleSoft just got acquired too.
Yeah. I guess there's an interesting thing that those are sort of like classically in the enterprise space. And like the other companies that we were talking about, like Xamarin and so on, those are like the bottom up dev tool companies that I think of as more of the dev tool space.
That's interesting because I had heard that most of GitHub's revenue came, and it's publicly available.
Yep.
It was all coming from GitHub Enterprise.
Well, yes, and that's not what I mean exactly, because I think everyone in the dev tool space live long enough and you will make all of your money from enterprise.
Or die because you won't go to that path.
Or die because you don't,
Which has happened to some friends of ours.
Yeah, Jesus.
You know who I'm thinking of.
I know many people who this fits.
Many people who have gone through Heavybit and not turned to the enterprise.
Well, I wasn't thinking of Heavybit, but just like in the dev space in particular, you get an email from people every now and then saying, we're closing down. Do you want to buy us?
Yeah.
And it's like, it could have. Yeah.
I think part of it is, and this is a little bit of a detour, but we'll come back. I think some people just basically want to run a foundation, not a startup. Like I was using this as an example of somebody that does, and I don't want to say exactly who they are because I think they're nice people, but they are doing a large registry project, and they just don't seem to have the fire in the belly to make it to $1 billion business. I think they would be quite happy if they had $2 million a year and running a foundation.
I think this is one of the problems with startups being so prominent in the software industry in general, because it becomes like the cool thing to do. It becomes the way to fund your thing. It becomes the way to make money. And there's a lot of people who just don't want to do that. They want to make a bootstrap business. They want to make a foundation, especially around the open source world. There's a lot of people who want to find a good way to fund open source
Yeah.
And we talked to Nadia about that before.
Once you get on the VC train, you're on a train.
Yeah, and it is a struggle to get off that train.
Yeah.
And when you do, it usually ends badly, or ends perhaps not badly, but not well.
Yeah. So I mean, just to walk through it, like it's considered a huge exit for GitHub and for Andreessen.
Yeah.
Because they put in 100 million, which is now
a billion-ish, I think.
Yeah, which seemed ludicrous, and now gave them a 7x return.
Yeah. Well, I remember Tom Preston Warner talked at Startup School just after, this was like 2012, I think, maybe just after they had raised that. And in the same thing, Spolsky was talking. And one of the points he made is that we don't know how many developers there are.
Yeah.
And I think he was at the time estimating there's like 20 or 25 million.
Okay,
users.
not just 25
developers in the world, right?
That would be a bit.
Right, but a few years beforehand, our best estimates were that there were like 8 million developers, and Stack Overflow showed us like, how could there be this many users?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing, like GitHub had 29 million registered users, and not all developers are on GitHub.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say a majority of developers are not on GitHub.
Yeah, I think it really shows the power of developers. So I think it is very good for startups that are eager to go down that path.
The VC path.
Yes.
I think it's good for both. I think the fact that there is big business to be made for devtools is good, even if you don't want to go down that path. Even if you want to have a small SaaS business, I think the challenge with the SaaS business is things change a lot, and that can be a struggle for a SaaS business. But other than that, I think it's good for VC-backed businesses as well as bootstrapped.
So your first company, Circle, got funded originally in
2011 was our first funding. That was like 50K.
Well,
and then it was about a year later we did $1.5 million, and then a year later we did another 6.
What was it like to try to go out and raise for a dev tool in 2011?
There were believers.
Believers.
The believers mostly had been involved with Heroku.
Mm.
It was mostly like in the Heavybit space. So Michael Deering and Steve Anderson were the big checks in our thing. SV Angel wrote a big check, or a medium check, I guess, big for them. And there was a lot of angels there who themselves were developers or had believed in the thing, and like they're making money on the thing. Like Circle goes well, and I think that without the first generation of tools, which I think of as Heroku and GitHub, having shown a lot of success, and at that point, Heroku had sold and GitHub had raised at a billion-ish.
Yep.
But I think Stripe was not the crazy whirlwind it became, nor had the New Relic exit. New Relic at the time was not regarded as the success that necessarily became. Twilio hadn't. What's Twilio's market cap? 550 billion or 5.5 billion?
Large.
Yeah, and those had not happened.
Yeah, I mean, my joke is that Heavybit is the house that Heroku built.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very much so.
I mean,
which is where we record from.
Yeah, I mean, I personally owe a lot to Heavybit. I mean,
oh, same, yeah.
That's how we got the podcast. That's how I met you, and it's all because Heroku.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just think about what sort of things are going to happen now with the GitHub liquidity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the GitHub thing was 30 times bigger than the Heroku exit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just massive return for everybody.
Everyone involved.
Yeah.
I reckon the 3 founders are probably about $1 billion each.
Wow. Yeah, so one of them, it's funny, Tom went to Mud with John Kodomo, my co-founder, and me. I never met him.
Yeah.
It's funny how it's a small school, but a lot of comp sci people came out of there.
Yeah.
Joe Beta also went there.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting with GitHub, it was a bit of a mess on the way.
Oh my gosh.
And
mess is a very generous
it really is
way to describe some of the stuff that happened there.
Yeah. There was the CEO being fired.
Yep.
Tom Preston Warner. There was Chris stepped down about 9 months ago.
Yep.
I'm forgetting some things. There has to be more things than that.
Those were the 2 main scandals that I remember.
Okay. I guess the other one that sort of industry back chatter is GitHub was fairly famously flat. In the way that Stripe was, and we copied them both at Circle, and that was a huge mistake. And I think that everyone who went down that route had a disaster along the way. And in GitHub's case, I believe they had big layoffs a couple of years ago as they were straightening out the internal culture. But I think what it proves is like, one, they did a good job for some like financial definition of success in turning it around. Like they were able to hit the next inflection points of growth and all that sort of thing. And I think the other thing is that no matter how much of a mess your company is, so long as you have like this really amazing product, it survives.
Yeah. I mean, I read a really interesting quote. So part one, I've heard through back channels that the reason why the price went so high is there was a bidding war.
Interesting.
That it was,
do we know who the other bidders were?
This is all totally gossip.
Yeah,
but the suspects were Microsoft, Google, and Atlassian.
Atlassian, interesting.
And that the bidding started around $1.5 billion.
Okay.
Which was because their last round was around that.
Yeah,
and they're just trying to basically get sold at this point. Because the quote I saw was that
this is good gossip.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, wow.
Well, so what I read, it was just like they could not go public.
Okay.
Because they didn't have a CEO, they didn't have a strong growth story.
Yeah.
So basically, they put themselves up for sale. What really inflated the price was just it's like
three buyers.
Yeah, and Atlassian just does not have deep enough pockets to do 7.5.
Atlassian can't put 7. Atlassian's value is 15.
Yeah, but it came down to Microsoft and Google, and like those are two of the most deep pocketed people.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I don't know where you get off the bidding train, but I think I could have seen it go higher. Like it would not have been completely shocking for it to go, like considering that both of those are investing in trying to make $100 billion businesses in, it's not the devtools, but it's like, a space that is led by devtools almost. But yeah, $7.5 billion. I mean, it seemed on one hand, expensive for what we know about GitHub's revenue, but for its place in the ecosystem, it at the same time, it seems like a steal.
Yeah, I don't have any insider knowledge. Just what I've read publicly is that the revenue was between 100 to 200 million.
Yeah, so they published it, or there was an article that in the last 9 months it was, I think, 98.
Yeah, so just to get bought at a 75x multiple is just crazy.
Yeah. Well, that was 9 months, so it's like 130.
Yeah.
I put it at 50, but same.
Yeah, it just seems like it was one of those things where you have two very deep-pocketed suitors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Heroku had a similar thing. And I don't know if it was bid up, but it was certainly that Salesforce really wanted it, and so it had revenues of $2 million on 250.
Yeah.
It sold for 250 on revenues of 2.
Yeah. Well, it just becomes this thing. It's like if you have to have something, what's the right price?
Right. 7.5 billion is that a future of Launch Darkly?
Well, thanks for wearing the shirt today.
Yeah, no worries.
I appreciate it.
Always.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still working through what it means for just the industry. I wonder if it might kick off an M&A boom
in the space. I mean, I think there's been one underway for a while. This certainly isn't the first purchase of devtools in particular by the big three, by Microsoft and Amazon and Google.
I think it shows that there's more money at play.
Mm-hmm. So Azure, GCP, and AWS. Each of them are going to be huge. I would say that they can each be 100 billion revenue businesses. And so when you're playing at that stakes, like, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
And the amount of money that they pay engineers.
Yeah.
Like, mid-level Googlers making $650K, let's say.
Oh my God.
I know, yeah.
I'm in the CEO thing. I'm in the wrong business.
We chose the path we chose.
I did. I don't regret it.
There were reasons that we chose those paths. But yeah, like you can go to one of those and like if they're paying a team that's not performing, or suppose they've got a team that's trying to do something and it's not succeeding, and they're putting 10 million a year at it, and it's like, well, looking over at your startup for 20, no big deal.
Yeah. So my summary is, I think it's really good for the ecosystem.
Yep.
I think it unlocks a lot of money that can get reinvested into new startups.
Yeah.
I think it's good for proving the power of developers.
Yeah, I think we're probably beyond the point where people doubt this. And I think GitHub is maybe the thing that puts us beyond this. I know investors have, for the most part, not raised the shadow of like developers don't pay for tools
they did with us.
Yeah, but it's the ones who don't really know.
I think it was also that we were a new category. And we hear this even when we go talk to some potential customers. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, why would I pay for that?
Right. There's a free or there's an open source thing out there.
Yeah. Oh. And then the smart customers, like, they literally show us their calculations. They're like, it would cost us this many sprints and this many developers to build that. We'd much rather buy your product.
Yeah. I probably mentioned this before, but I have an email from Paul Graham saying developers don't pay for devtools.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
are you gonna hit reply today?
I think when Circle is involved in the transaction, then that'll be the day I might hit reply on it. I remember seeing Paul Graham tweet about GitLab, and GitLab raised 20-30 million B or something like that, and this was the thing he responded to. It's like, for something of this magnitude in developer tools, something big must be happening. And I'm like, yeah, developer tools is happening, and it's been happening for a while.
Yeah, you didn't notice, but developer tools are here.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome. I mean, I think there's also a lot of interesting corollaries to their acquisition of LinkedIn.
In the sense that it's the network that they're acquiring.
Yeah.
Right. The product is like, you could build the product.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is challenging to build the community.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about all the people like jumping ship?
Who jumping ship?
Oh, all the people on Hacker News are tweeting about like moving off GitHub now that the big beast owns them. I can see your face. I share I share your opinion.
What does my face say?
It's a frustration at the people who, I guess they're the sort of people who won't pay for software. And
also, I think and it might be biased, but there's a new Microsoft.
I completely agree.
Like we went up to Build, we podcasted from there. Mm-hmm. It's not the Microsoft of 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And not at all. Like we're two CEOs since then, right? When did Ballmer come in?
I don't remember.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, but like the people that I know from Microsoft are so smart and so passionate. Mm-hmm. Like you have like Nat.
Yeah.
You have Javier.
The new GitHub CEO.
Yeah. Well, let's come back to that. You have like Javier Soltero.
Yeah.
And Kevin, who was one of our first guests.
Yep.
Who was the engineering lead at Accompli.
They're also hiring like a lot of people, especially in the Linux and the container space, like Jess Frizzelli, and a lot of sort of well-known Linuxers are working at Microsoft.
Yeah. I think people have the image of Microsoft that is unfounded.
Let's be fair. It was accurate at the time.
It was accurate at the time, but I think the people I know at Microsoft are care deeply about software development. Mm-hmm. Like Cindy Alvarez is such a brilliant person.
I think the thing about Microsoft is that it is a big company led by growth.
Yeah.
Right? And they care about that growth. And in 99, Linux was a threat to that growth. And open source was a threat to that growth. And their response to it was unpleasant.
Well, my saying is they try to create a walled garden to keep all this evil out.
Yeah.
And I think they realized that they had just basically walled everybody else out.
Well, I think they did more than that. I think they, when you look at Bill Gates' comments on Linux, and a lot of the FUD wasn't coined for Microsoft, but it was used a lot in I'm going to call it in the /dot era.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in full disclosure, LaunchDarkly, my company is a partner with Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And they've been a very good partner to us. They came down to Heavybit because they wanted to see what the dev tool companies down here were up to.
Yeah.
And they asked people like how many Microsoft products to use. Are you using Visual Studio or people are like, what? You have dev tools? And they're like, oh, it's not even that people dislike our tools. It's that people don't even realize we exist anymore.
Right.
Like we are irrelevant.
Yeah, that's right. And they were long irrelevant. And this is the way that people felt about Azure when it came out. It was like, oh, they're making a cloud for some .NET thing, and no one cares about .NET. And obviously, Xamarin, amongst other things, has proven that there's a large contingent of people who care about .NET, but not in the Linux world.
Yeah.
And so they're busy remaking their image around, frankly, where the money is, because the money is in Linux and is in Linux hosting, and no one really cares. Or there's a lot of large enterprises out there that build on Windows, but it's not a big deal.
I think what they realized, and again, I'll say Microsoft has been a wonderful partner to us. Mm-hmm. I think they realized that they basically lost a generation of developers.
Completely true. I think that's extremely accurate. I think they look at the innovation that happens in
Ruby, Python.
Yeah. Well, I think we can call it in the open source world. Like I think it's fair to say that like there's the Microsoft world and the open source world, and those are sort of the two major things. But in the Microsoft world, Microsoft had to make the innovation. In the open source world, it comes from like dozens and dozens of places, and all of our startups are, it's not that we don't have .NET SDKs or that kind of thing, but like we're definitely servicing the open source part of the world.
Yeah, and then we had Martin Woodward talk on an episode with us who was spearheading open source at Microsoft, and how he's just like, we got to start innovating again.
Yeah.
We cannot afford to be,
Well, now they're the biggest contributors to software on GitHub.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm having a total flashback. As I said before, Launch Darkly is a Microsoft partner. About a year and a half ago in November, I went to a Microsoft partner event in New York. And the two presenters that stuck out in my head were the two non-Microsoft presenters.
Okay.
Well, one is non. So one was Chris from GitHub.
Oh, okay.
Came on stage, and it was like this big reveal.
Yeah. He was the surprise, wonderful guest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just remember it was like, because it was just like, it was just, like such a culture thing of San Francisco open source versus Seattle.
Yeah.
.NET. And then they flashed up like Microsoft loves open source.
Right. Yeah.
And I was there, and it was just like this moment. And I also then
when was that?
November of 2016.
Okay.
And then I remember Nat Friedman getting on stage and giving. Nat Friedman always gives a good talk.
This is before Xamarin got acquired.
It was right after.
Right after. Okay.
So he was, on his big publicity tour.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good move for him. He's a smart guy. It's a huge
for Nat to CEO of GitHub.
It's a promotion. I don't know if it's a promotion or lateral or just a lot of pressure.
Well, I think he, from Xamarin, when he went to Microsoft, I think he's head of developer services. Is that right? VP of developer services, I want to say.
It's funny. So John was meeting with some Microsoft folks, and I tried to describe people's different roles and hierarchies, and it was a total mess.
Yeah.
It's like this interleave of like program management and VPs. And,
I mean, it's safe to say he was a big deal at Microsoft already.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't an acquisition where he went and sat in the corner.
The Wall Street Journal actually did an article about this, about how they had this new rising crop of talent from acquisitions. And the two people they specifically called out that I remember were Nat and Javier.
Right. Yeah, because Javier took over,
basically,
I want to say all of Outlook.
Yeah.
Or all of mobile, one of the two.
Yeah, and for the listeners at home, Javier Sotera was the co-founder of Acompli, which was not a Heavybit company, but sat here.
So they sold Acompli to Microsoft and became Outlook, the new Outlook mobile.
Yeah, what was the price? Like 300?
I thought it was 200.
Yeah, something quite high.
Yeah, it was they were a year old, two, if even.
But they just said, if you're interested, for those listening, you can go and listen to Kevin's podcast with us about their engineering culture, which was brilliant.
One of the first ones, I think.
Yeah, he was our first guest after Chris Gale.
Okay, so yeah, Nat is CEO now of GitHub. I mean, they've been searching for a CEO since Chris stepped down about 9 months ago. And my understanding is that he hasn't been running it day to day.
Well, then
that maybe their COO was running it day to day.
Yeah.
And Nat has not taken over yet, but will take over when the transaction closes, which I think does not look like it's going to be a quick transaction.
Well, that's part of the scuttlebutt I heard, is that basically they couldn't go public.
Because they had no CEO.
Yeah. And they couldn't go public. It would not have been impossible for them to raise more money, but it would not have been at awesome terms. Yeah,
people aren't going to invest in that sort of climate, but like acquiring in that sort of climate is totally fine, because you're gonna make a few changes anyway, and the fact that changes are needed makes it easier.
Yeah, well, I think they sold it precisely the right time, and then they could get a bidding war going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, some people were speculating before this acquisition happened that they would have to, get sold in a down round for like $500 million.
Jesus Christ! I remember when the day before it was announced, so Sunday night. People were speculating.
Well, I sent you a link.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, we need to record, and you're like, what?
We didn't know numbers.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'd have guessed 7.5. Like people were speculating that it was like flat on the last round, which would have been about 2.
Flat or down.
Yeah. And then it wasn't.
Bidding war.
Yeah. And I mean, once you look at it, it's like, it's very obvious in retrospect that the number makes sense. But at the time, I was certainly like, yeah, this could go either way. I didn't know if it was like a fire sale, if it was fine, if it was amazing. It could have been any of the three. Yeah.
So this is also public knowledge. So Atlassian about 4 weeks ago announced that they were taking out a $1 billion line of credit.
Oh, interesting.
So there was a lot of chatter about
what are they doing it for?
Well, because they took out $1 billion line of credit just basically as a war chest.
I wonder if they were already in talks.
That's the reasoning. Is that
do you think Atlassian kicked it all off and then GitHub got some more bidders?
I don't know if they kicked it all off, but the chatter that I heard was, well, what do they need this $1 billion for?
Mm-hmm. What are they going to use it for now? They could buy LaunchDarkly.
And a Circle CI too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a billion buys a lot of things.
So what do you think it means to the employees at GitHub?
I saw Zach Ullman tweeting today, who's one of the early GitHub, and they didn't know.
But he left a while ago.
He left a while ago, but presumably he bought his shares.
Oh, I meant for the current.
Oh, the current employees? I mean, 2-year earnout, Microsoft salaries, the salary doubles and a nice check to kick it off. And if you're current and in a valued role, you're suddenly quite wealthy in San Francisco. Not very wealthy because it's San Francisco, but you're doing okay.
So another unattributable rumor I heard was that the person who led the acquisition, they got their bonuses based on retention of the company they acquired.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it.
So they have every incentive to make that team extremely happy.
I mean, once the founders make their billion each, it's a bit more money to the founders doesn't make more sense.
Yeah,
what's the difference between 500 million and $1 billion?
Jesus.
No, I mean it's nothing. It's irrelevant. Whereas you put that into the employees, and how many employees does GitHub have? 1,000? I'm guessing 1,000. I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah, $1 billion does a lot around there, and obviously there's people who've been there longer and shorter and so on. But the 7.5 billion typically includes the retention, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure they got a healthy chunk of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a mass. I mean, my mind boggles. I mean, so TripIt, my former company, I wasn't a founder, but I was early. We got acquired for $120 million, which was considered big.
Holy shit, I didn't know you were rich, Edith.
I was employed 23. I made enough that I could start LaunchDarkly, but not enough to jet off to a Caribbean island in a private plane.
I started Dark on my credit card. I guess we're going to talk about that next episode, but the... not much money after I left Circle. Certainly haven't sold anything. So the starting it off was done on the credit card. Fortunately, once you've had one company go well, it's easy to raise.
Yeah.
But there was I was near my limit.
A final story to end the episode. So I wasn't a founder at TripIt. I was employee. They were selling to consumers. I was brought in as a product person selling to businesses. So I met a guy at an event, and he said, do you feel bad that you didn't make more money off of it? And I was like, no, the founders took all the early risk. I was an employee. But it gave me so much to be part of that transaction because I had the money I could live off of, and then also the early TripIt founders and people who'd made money could put into LaunchDarkly. So our first angels were our VP marketing, our VP products, our VP biz dev, who all had the money to put in.
Well, it's interesting. A similar thing happened at GitHub. So, Tom Preston Warner had made money at PowerSet, which had been acquired a couple of. It was a big acquisition.
Bing.
And Bing
Acquired by Microsoft.
Oh, PowerSet is now Bing.
Well, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Everything comes in a circle.
It really does. But he had the money to start GitHub and for GitHub to be bootstrapped and so on as a result of that.
Yeah. People say that's one of the issues with the Seattle ecosystem is that there's not enough acquisitions.
I mean, I think that's true everywhere that's not Silicon Valley.
Well, any final thoughts on the Microsoft acquisition?
I think in general, it's going to be good for GitHub. It's going to be good for open source. It's going to be good for the space. It's definitely going to be good for the employees.
I think it's good for Microsoft.
Yeah. Oh, fabulously so.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of LaunchDarkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.